Virgo. I have been sitting with this energy for a while before pressing record because what I am about to say is not easy to say in the specific and direct form that that truth sometimes requires of the person delivering it. When the truth is the kind that lands with weight rather than the kind that lands with comfort, and the delivering of it requires something from the person doing the delivering that the comfortable kind does not require. I pressed record anyway because you deserve the truth more than you deserve the comfortable version of it that would leave out the part that is hardest to hear, but most important to know before what is about to happen happens and you are in the middle of it without having been prepared in the orienting and steadying form. That knowing in advance always provides for the person who receives the knowing before the happening arrives, rather than during it or after it, when the preparation is no longer preparation, but only understanding of something that has already happened without the studying the advance knowing would have given. So I am sorry you have to hear this, and I am going to tell you anyway, because that is what this reading is for. Welcome, my beautiful soul, and stay with me through every word of this. Before the truth, which I will give you in full, and without softening it past the point of usefulness, I need to sit with something I feel in your energy right now that is sitting beneath everything else, in the deep and quiet and often unnamed form of something that has been present for a period that is longer than the situation currently in front of you has been in front of you. I feel anger in your energy, not the explosive and visible kind, not the kind that announces itself in the loud and confrontational form of someone who is letting the anger be seen by the people it is directed at or by anyone around them. In the expressed and external form that anger sometimes takes when it is allowed full expression, the quiet kind, the specific and compressed form of anger that has been sitting in the body without full expression for long enough that it has changed its texture from the hot and immediate form of fresh anger into the cooler and more settled form of anger that has been living in the body long enough to become something almost indistinguishable from the ordinary interior landscape of the person carrying it. Whew. You have been wronged in the specific and quiet and unacknowledged form of someone who was treated in a way that did not match what they deserved in the situation they were in, and who absorbed the mismatch in the quiet and interior form rather than naming it loudly or confronting it directly or making it visible to the people around them in the way that the wronging deserved to be made visible before it was absorbed without the confrontation that would have named it as the wronging it was. The anger is the appropriate and proportionate response to having been wronged in the specific and unacknowledged form that the wronging took and that the absorbing perpetuated by removing the wronging from the visible space between you and the person who did the wronging into the interior and unexpressed space where it became the quiet anger. That I feel in your energy right now as something that has been sitting there for longer than it should have been sitting without the expression it deserved. Spirit wants me to say this directly. Before anything else, your anger is not the problem. The situation that produced the anger is the problem. And the anger is simply the accurate reading of the situation by a person whose interior is functioning correctly. In the specific form of anger, that correct functioning produces when a wronging has occurred and has not been acknowledged or addressed in the sufficient and resolving form that would have allowed the anger to complete its purpose and release into the settled form of something that has been resolved rather than the compressed form of something that has not. Now, the truth in the specific and direct form that I sat with before pressing record, because it is not a soft truth, but it is a useful one. And useful truths in the orienting and steadying form of something that prepares you for what is coming are worth more than comfortable fictions that leave you unprepared for the arriving of the thing that the useful truth was always pointing toward. The person in your situation is about to make a move in the specific and significant form of someone who has been deciding in the interior and private dimension of their life what to do next with the situation between you, and who has now decided in the arrived at and no longer deliberating form of someone whose decision has crossed from the deliberating interior into the decided and about to move exterior that this reading is warning you about in advance of the move that is very close to arriving. The truth I am sorry you have to hear is that the move they are about to make is coming toward you rather than away from you. I know that sounds like good news, and in some ways it is. But the reason I sat with this energy for a while before pressing record is because coming toward you, in the form it is taking, is more complicated than the simple and uncomplicated form of someone moving in your direction with the simple and uncomplicated intent of the good and clear and straightforward thing that a simple movement towards someone represents, when it is the simple and uncomplicated form rather than the complicated form that this movement is taking. The truth is this: they are coming toward you, but they have tried this before in different forms, and I need to name the forms before I describe what is different this time, because the naming of the forms is what makes the difference visible as the actual difference it is, rather than the hoped for difference that has not always materialized in the previous forms of their moving toward you. They tried distance first in the pulling back and waiting form of someone who believed that distance would clarify something or reset something or produce in you the specific response that would make their moving toward you feel safer than it felt before the distance was tried as the clarifying or resetting or response producing mechanism that they believed it was before the trying of it revealed that it was not. They tried redirection next in the focusing elsewhere form of someone who attempted to redirect the energy they had in relation to you toward other situations or people or occupations that would absorb what they were feeling in a direction that was not toward you, and that would therefore reduce the specific pull they were feeling in your direction by giving the pull somewhere else to go that was not you. And that would eventually replace the pull toward you with the pull toward whatever the redirection was directing the pull toward as the alternative to the pull toward you that they were trying to replace. And they tried silence in the hoping it would settle form of someone who believed that if they simply did not act on what they were feeling for long enough, the feeling would settle into something more manageable and less demanding than what it was in the active and present form. That was producing the pull toward you, that the silence was supposed to quiet by giving it nothing to act on, and therefore reducing it through the starvation of inaction into something smaller and more containable than what it was when it was active, and pulling and demanding to be acted on. Distance, redirection, silence. None of them worked. And the truth, I am sorry, you have to hear, is that the not working of all three is what is producing the move toward you that is now arriving in the decided and about to move form of someone who has exhausted the alternatives and who is now moving towards you. Because every other direction has been tried and found insufficient to replace what moving towards you would produce in the specific and irreplaceable form of you, specifically, and not anyone or anything else. That the alternatives were tried in the place of. Now, the part that matters most for how you receive what is coming in the move toward you that is arriving now, after the distance and the redirection and the silence have all been tried and found insufficient, what is different this time is not that they want you more. They have always wanted you in the sustained and specific form that the three failed alternatives confirm by having been tried and found wanting in the wanting replacement form that none of them were able to take. What is different this time is that they have run out of alternatives, and what runs out of alternatives arrives at the only remaining option without the buffer of other options that previous arrivals had, which is what makes this arrival different from the previous ones in the specific and significant form of someone who is not moving toward you, while keeping one eye on the alternatives that they might redirect toward if the moving toward you becomes uncomfortable in the way that the previous movings became uncomfortable before the redirecting happened and the alternatives were tried again and found insufficient again. There are no more alternatives. This time, the eye is not on the alternatives. The eye is on you, fully, because there is nowhere else left to look. That has not already been looked at and found to not be you. Spirit is showing me a specific window, and I want to name it directly rather than leave it in the approximate form. That would make it less useful. Then the specific form allows it to be. For the person who needs to know when to watch for the move, that has been decided and is now arriving in the only remaining direction available to the person who tried everything else first. Within the next 72 hours, something arrives in the form of contact or movement or presence. That is the leading edge of the move toward you that this reading has been describing in the decided and alternatives exhausted form of someone who is finally moving without the eye on the exit that previous movings had, and without the alternatives waiting as the fallback if the moving becomes uncomfortable in the ways the previous ones did before the alternatives were tried again. 72 hours. Watch for the leading edge. In whatever specific and personal form your life delivers it in. Now I want to speak to a voice that I feel in your energy that is going to react to what I have just described in a specific and predictable form that I want to address before the reacting happens, rather than after, when the addressing would be less useful than the addressing that happens before. The voice says, I have been here before. They have moved toward me before. After the distance and the redirection and the silence, and it did not produce the arriving in the full and staying form that this reading is describing as what is different this time. And I am tired of being the person who opens the door when the moving happens and then manages the closing of the door again. When the moving turns out to be another temporary form of the same pattern that has been repeating. In the distance, redirection, silence, move, repeat form that I recognize and that I am tired of, in the compressed anger form that has been sitting in my body for the full period of the pattern. I hear that voice, and I am not going to tell it that it is wrong or that its wariness is a deficiency or that the protection it is offering is something to be overcome in the name of openness or receptivity or the trusting of what this reading is describing as different this time without the evidence that the different is real rather than described. The wariness is earned and it is appropriate and it is not something to be dissolved. Before the evidence arrives that the different is real in the visible and confirmable form of actions that match the intention of someone who has exhausted the alternatives and who is now moving without the exit eye and without the fallback alternatives, waiting in the periphery. Watch for the actions, not the words. Words that arrive in the move toward you, period, are the most available and least costly thing a person can offer in the moving form when they are trying to demonstrate that the moving is real and different this time from the previous times that produced the pattern, and the compressed anger and the wariness that the voice is expressing in the reading of the move that is arriving in the 72 hours. This reading is naming, watch for the actions in the quiet and consistent and accumulating form of someone who is doing the thing rather than saying the thing in the period of the move toward you that is about to arrive, in the leading edge form of the 72 hours that spirit is pointing toward as the specific window for the beginning of what this reading has been describing. Since the pressing of record, that almost did not happen because the truth I am delivering required the sitting with before the delivering. I want to give you something before this closes. In the specific and permission form that the compressed anger deserves from someone who sees it clearly and names it without asking you to release it prematurely before the evidence arrives, that releasing it is safe in the specific situation that produced it, and that is now producing the move toward you, that this reading is warning you about in advance. Permission to let the anger inform your receiving rather than suppressing it in the name of openness, that the move toward you is inviting from the person moving who would prefer the fully open receiving to the anger informed receiving that your history with this situation has earned you the right to offer in the specific and proportionate form of someone who opens the door without pretending that the previous closings did not happen, in the pattern that produced the compressed anger that is sitting in your body right now as the accurate and proportionate response to having been in this pattern for as long as you have been in it. Open the door when the move arrives in the anger informed and evidence watching form of someone who is neither closed nor performing the open that the previous times produced, in the fully trusting and pattern ignoring form that those previous opens took before the closing came again, and the compressed anger grew a layer deeper in the sitting in the body form that I feel in your energy right now as the proportionate and earned and real response to a pattern that has been repeating. And that is about to be offered the opportunity to end in the alternatives exhausted. Eye on you. No fallback available form that this reading is describing as different this time in the specific and arriving and 72-hour form of the truth I was sorry to have to tell you. But that you needed to hear before it arrived, which is now. You are protected, and the anger is appropriate, and the watching for actions rather than words is the right form of the receiving for this specific move toward the specific person who earned the watching by producing the pattern. That produced the compressed anger that is sitting in the body right now of someone who is protected and seen and told the truth. Before it arrived in the 72-hour form, that is already in motion toward you